Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, our distinguished guest, Eleanore Reinders. So today I have the honor and the pleasure to host in our publishing African seminar series co-organized by the Institute for Humanities and the Laboratoire d'analyse des sociétés et pouvoirs, which is based in Saint-Louis, in Gaston Berger University. This program is generously funded by Open Society, the Foundation. So today, as my colleagues, Itai Makone, who used to be there to present the English seminar series, have some issues concerning our lovely nephew that she gave birth last month. So I have to chair this seminar series. Okay. So I have to present briefly our guest today. Our guest is Eleanore Reinders. She is a portfolio manager at Turn for Line, Taylor and Francis and Routledge. Today she will discuss the potential of collaboration and partnership programs to boost African publishing international, bridging South-North divide. She will also discuss some of the ways publishers can responsibly campaign African scholarship, supporting its contribution to the world. So I will let the floor to our distinguished guest, Eleanore Reinders, to share her thoughts concerning the issue of publishing in Africa and the way that we can build a collaboration between South and North. Eleanore, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ibrahima, and thank you everybody for having me. I've greatly enjoyed listening to the other speakers in this seminar series, so I'm really honored to participate. As you've heard, I'm a portfolio manager for Taylor and Francis, working on some of the arts and social science journals in our African portfolio. I cover a range of subjects, including African studies, politics, business and economics, and history. The common thread is that all of the journals I work on are either based in Africa or African in scope, or both. The vast majority have African editors. From TNF's perspective, having a South African team is an investment in our relationship with these journals and a clear signal that we value our African content offering. TNF has had a South African team for 14 years, and we're the only major international commercial publisher that has this sort of local presence in sub-Saharan Africa. The core of what I'm discussing today relates to our co-publishing partnerships in the region, because I feel strongly that this sort of publication model has great potential to alleviate some of the challenges experienced by African journal publishers and help bridge the South-North divides, which can be so punishing to African research generation and dissemination. The primary question this series is asking is, how do we strengthen the African publishing ecosystem? And I'm suggesting that one way to do that is to subscribe to a philosophy of partnership instead of competition. Divine spoke very memorably of a third space, something hybrid, which allows us to guard against extraversion, the extraction and expropriation of African knowledge by foreign publishers, but also against provincialization and isolating ourselves intellectually. I propose that co-publishing or collaboration more broadly can provide that third space. It is also hopefully a good way to resolve the tension between decolonization ideals and the need to be seen and heard globally, which is, of course, very important for African academics. I'm speaking today about journals publishing specifically because that's my area of expertise. I also work almost exclusively in the humanities and social sciences, so I apologize if some of what I have to say is biased in that direction. My regional focus is slightly narrower than I would like, in the sense that although TNF aspires to partnering much more broadly in Africa, our existing co-publishing partners are all South African. And I'm South African myself, so this is the context I'm comfortable in. There's no reason at all, though, that this publishing model can't be applied in numerous contexts, and it has been. And co-publishing aside, we do collaborate with societies and institutions from all over Africa. On that note, I should also point out that co-publishing is one end of the spectrum of collaboration. There are many other ways for researchers and publishers to work together to overcome South-North barriers. Diverse perspectives are well known to enrich knowledge generation, and collaboration in all forms is beneficial. It's very common for publishers to be contracted to produce journals on behalf of academic institutions and societies. The majority of our local portfolio falls into this category. And this kind of partnership is sometimes described as co-publishing, but I'm using the term specifically to describe partnerships between two publishing houses. I'm going to share some slides for most of the rest of my talk. Just bear with me. Can somebody please confirm that you can see that? Okay.
You can see that.
Thanks, Ibrahima. Okay, so for starters, a little background on TNF Africa's CoPub program. Our slogan in the TNF Africa team is local partnerships, global network, and co-publishing is at the core of what we do. We publish about 70 journals out of the regional office. 95% of these are African journals published on behalf of or in collaboration with societies and institutions. And furthermore, about 65% of these journals are also co-published. We have 3 South African co-publishing partners: NISC, an independent publisher based in Makanda, with whom we publish both HSS and STM titles; UNISA Press, the publishing house of South Africa's largest university, with whom we co-publish mostly HSS journals; and MedFarm, which is a specialist medical open access publisher. These are all long-standing, well-established partnerships of many years, and we're confident in calling it a successful publishing model. An ethos of partnership has been key to TNF's success in the region. TNF Africa also has a very active Twitter handle, which I've included on the slide. If you're interested, that platform will give you nice insight into what we do in the region. To be clear, the co-publishing partnerships I'm talking about are true partnerships, not mentoring schemes or some version of patronage. That kind of thing has its place, but I want to make a clear distinction. We have various co-publishing models for journals, but basically it entails sharing publishing responsibilities and rewards. On many of our shared journals, the South African publishers have the primary relationship with the owning society and retain primary editorial control, and we provide support and act as content hosts and international distributors. For others, the opposite is true. TNF is the primary publisher, and our South African partner is a local service provider and distributor. It makes sense to try to balance these things as equally as possible across a portfolio of shared journals, and that's what we try to do. By joining forces, we use our different strengths to work towards common goals, and we offset each other's weaknesses. For TNF, having the capacity to do things like print and distribute locally means that we can charge prices specific to the African market and tap into an audience we would otherwise struggle to engage. TNF offers things like a South Africa-specific APC rate and Africa-specific subscription prices in local currency, which we wouldn't be able to do without co-publishing partners. Whereas for the African publishing partners, working with TNF allows access to an international market and to economies of scale, which wouldn't otherwise be realizable. The amount of money required to compete globally in things like SEO ranking and research visibility for journals is not feasible for a small regional publishing house. But working with TNF means getting research hosted competitively on one of the 500 most visited websites in the world without marginalizing the audience they know and serve locally. Authors publishing in this co-published portfolio are hopefully getting the best of both worlds. in the sense that they're supporting a local publisher of very high quality, but also benefiting from an internationally recognized brand, which will ensure their work is accessible all over the world. Likewise, for the African societies and institutions who own many of these journals, they can claim the advantages of having a local publisher and of having an international one. The potential for imbalance in South-North power dynamics, the risk of exploitation by better resource publishers, is something that's already come up in this series, and it's certainly important to guard against this kind of unethical behavior. But as I'm trying to prove, and as Stephanie Kitchen also pointed out, it is possible to co-publish in an equitable, fair way, which is mutually beneficial. Now that I've explained the essentials of what I mean by journals co-publishing, I'd like to chat about some of the obstacles faced by regional journals and how we can responsibly tackle them together. The dominance of traditional citation metrics in signaling journal quality is often problematic for journals produced on the continent, because having these metrics is dependent on being indexed in the databases which produce them, and it is more difficult to gain entry for publications from the global south, even when they publish high-quality peer-reviewed content. This is mainly just because the primary criterion used to determine quality is citations, not just from anywhere, but from journals already indexed by the database. And high citations from top northern journals are harder to achieve for smaller publications, which often don't have the reach to generate sufficient citations and downloads, even if they do technically have the quality. The major indices therefore serve as gatekeepers, which inadvertently, for the most part, protect the status quo of northern dominance. It must be said, these databases have been making efforts recently to be more inclusive, and hopefully we see that continue and see it make a difference. I'm talking primarily here about Web of Science because the impact factor continues to be perceived as the gold standard of international journal quality. That's not to say African research isn't breaking through these barriers. African research coverage by Web of Science is increasing, but it lags behind the rest of the world. Here is global research output measured by Web of Science from 2000 to 2020 for HSS. Note that Europe and North America are far outstripping the rest. See Africa in navy blue at the bottom, a small global share of output, but slowly growing. And here's the same graph, but for STM output. Asia has recently overtaken Europe in STM and total output as a result. But apart from the disruption caused by China over the last decade, Europe and North America remain dominant. Once again, Africa is at the bottom, but slowly climbing and has recently caught up with Australasia. Zoning in on Africa and removing the subject divide, it's clear that Africa is on the rise, and South Africa is the country with by far the highest Web of Science output on the continent. Although South Africa's output isn't growing at the same pace as the continent as a whole, making it clear that some other countries must also be experiencing good growth, albeit at a smaller scale. Here are some of them. Clear growth across the board, with Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Ghana most notable for growth in recent years. The thing is, we can of course be sure that large quantities of African research aren't being measured in this data, as it only applies to papers with African authors publishing in journals indexed by Web of Science. The fact that Web of Science is so commonly used to analyze research publication data creates a blind spot and makes it seem like Africa produces less research than it does. When it comes to simply ensuring accreditation with databases like Web of Science, co-publishing is useful, and our co-published African portfolio is very well accredited, both with global powerhouses like Web of Science and Scopus, and with local African players like the South African Department of Higher Education and Training, which is all important for South African researchers due to the government subsidy system. TNF's reach helps with the former, and the local networks and reputations of our South African partners help with the latter. However, there's an increasing trend in journals publishing to deprioritize the unfair dominance of the impact factor and similar citation metrics because of the subject and regional inequalities they promote, or rather exacerbate. I'm sure this audience is well aware of DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment, often also just called the San Francisco Declaration, which aims to help promote fair and robust best practice for global research assessment. TNF is a signatory of DORA, and one of the main goals is to diversify metric use. We therefore now display a suite of research metrics on our website, rather than just the traditional impact factor score. This range includes whatever citation metrics are available for each journal, but also usage and speed metrics and things like acceptance rates, so that authors can get a realistic idea of what to expect if they submit to the journal, and they can realistically evaluate the reach and impact it is having using multiple criteria. Importantly, these pages also include explanations of how each metric is generated, how they might be limited, and why certain journals may not qualify for certain metrics. None of this is unique to TNF. It's a global publishing trend which we endorse to help break down subject and regional inequalities. In the long term, it should be helpful to African publishers. Similarly, the rise of altmetrics or alternative metrics is a useful tool for combating the dominance of citations as the sole measure of research quality. The altmetric donut, which appears at the paper level, not at the journal level, measures the mention of research on social media, in policy documents, in news sources, in blogs, and so on. You can see the colors of the donut broken down here on the slide. It is intended to give a more well-rounded indication of how much a piece of research is being talked about and used beyond narrow academic circles. Altmetric scores are especially useful for journals which cater to practitioner or activist audiences, which may not score high on citations, but often have valuable real-world impact. A good way to make sure you score highly in altmetrics for your research paper is to try to get coverage for your work on a platform like the Conversation Africa, which covers academic research in a news report format, more accessible to the wider public. TNF Africa has a partnership with TCA, which we find hugely beneficial in boosting African research on the global stage. Papers covered by TCA are often picked up by other news platforms, leading to big increases in usage, help with reputation building for researchers, and also furthering the objectives of the open research movement by making valuable research as accessible as possible. We encourage this kind of engagement by agreeing to bring down the paywall for a full year for any subscription content originally published in our journals, which is covered by the conversation. I would really encourage any early career researchers, or late career researchers for that matter, to promote their work and try to get a wider audience by publishing on platforms of this kind. Moving on to the second broad trend I would like to discuss. This is also by no means limited to publishing, but it does have a noticeable impact on it, and that is the increased consciousness of diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. This coincides in the regional context with a powerful resurgence in decolonization movements in African academia, and even more broadly with things like the Black Lives Matter movement. Knowledge activism along regional and racial lines has been re-energized, and in the academic publishing industry, this has led to a very healthy interrogation of publishing practice. People are asking questions about why African research output seems underrepresented globally and what factors might be causing this marginalization of African voices. At the journal level, it means asking questions about why journals which purport to be African in scope don't have diverse African representation on their editorial boards and teams, or why they publish content on Africa but not by African researchers, or why they reach academic audiences in the global north but aren't or can't be read extensively by researchers in Africa. There is a counter movement aiming to recognize the value of contextualized research and the regional or niche journals which often publish it. Where once the ambition for African journals was to appear as international as possible, I'm now seeing a preoccupation with ensuring these journals are first and foremost well-grounded in their local contexts. African researchers and publishers should be making the most of any opportunities that arise to make themselves heard. One of the ways we see this manifest is in the growing attempts to publish in African languages. I think we are seeing more of a willingness from publishers to invest in the infrastructure necessary to be multilingual. A lot of this is being done experimentally rather than routinely to see what works and what doesn't. It isn't easy to publish in African languages. There are infrastructural barriers, but there are benefits to doing so, not least of all, the potential to reach new audiences. The best project of this sort that I've been involved in was for the journal Eastern African Literary and Cultural Studies, which we co-published with NISC. It published a special issue on trends in Swahili literatures, in which every paper was published in both English and Swahili. This project required external translators and copy editors and generated a lot of extra work for the wonderful journal editors. The added complexity of the translation workflow also caused lots of delays. But the end result is something the authors, the editors, and the publishers can be very proud of. You can see here that the Swahili version of the special issue introduction has been downloaded and read more than the English version. It's good to prove that these things are possible and worthwhile. And finally, a brief mention of the trend of open access in publishing, which is rapidly transforming the journal's publishing industry. Open access is part of the broader open research or open science movement, but it's open access in particular that should be scrutinized with regard to regional inequalities. I should start by saying that TNF is very much in favor of open research and open access, and we're embracing this trend wholeheartedly, while also doing our best to help surmount any subject and regional inequalities that may occur as a result. A great deal of good can result from open access publishing, and it is largely intended as a democratizing force. It is certainly a positive when it comes to ensuring African researchers have free access to as much global research output as possible. But there is some risk that the global North's open access preferences could further entrench the regional knowledge divide. Southern Africa has to date endorsed green open access, or diamond-sponsored open access, more than they have a gold open access route. By gold OA, I mean the APC model, which is dominant in Europe, and which so many international funders are advocating for at the policy level with things like Plan S. The potential problem is that if regional trends continue as they are, we could have a global research ecosystem which sees Northern researchers routinely publishing open access using Creative Commons licenses, their APCs paid by funders with mandates which insist on this model of publishing, or by their well-resourced institutions with similar policy directives, so that their research can be accessed freely by anybody wanting to read it. While African researchers, with much less access to funding, have their work stuck behind a paywall they can't afford to bring down. This can only exacerbate inequalities in usage, citations, and reach. Collaboration can be helpful in this regard too. It is certainly a powerful incentive for authors to collaborate across regional divides. Using Web of Science data again, with apologies for the shortcomings of that data, we can see that African authors are collaborating extensively across borders. The most common collaborators for African authors are South Africans, Americans, Egyptians, and the British, or at least that is what we see from the last 5 years of data in Web of Science. It is also true that major funders don't operate in narrow regional enclaves, and African research is often sponsored by international players. This slide shows the top funders for African research papers indexed by Web of Science since 2015. Note that the only funder on this list based on the continent is South Africa's National Research Foundation. African researchers and publishers are going to need to be creative about surmounting this potential problem while still embracing all of the potential of the open access movement. It's true that big commercial publishers like TNF have so far been able to provide things like regional APC waivers or discounts to help researchers from less well-funded regions. But ultimately, what we would want to see is a healthy enough African publishing ecosystem that these sorts of corrective policies aren't necessary. If Africa wants to participate meaningfully in the gold open access system favored by much of the global North, African institutions, governments, and funders will need to start better appreciating the value of their academic output and investing in research accordingly, so that African researchers are able to compete on a level playing field globally. Co-publishing helps, as we can pool resources and apply pressure in different quarters, but this trend is truly applicable to the whole ecosystem rather than just the publishers. The answer might also lie in diversifying open access models and platforms. TNF's open access policy relates mainly to author choice. We think it's only right that authors have as much choice as possible when it comes to how they want to publish, be that in traditional subscription journals, hybrid options, pure open access publications, open access platforms, and so on. All of these publication options have value, and it really comes down to who that particular author wants to have a conversation with in their subject community. We also enable green open access as much as possible, and we're experimenting with lots of different open access models. One worth mentioning is our F1000 research platform, which allows for rapid publication online and embraces open and transparent peer review processes, which is another emerging trend in the open research movement. The African Academy of Sciences, an influential Pan-African promoter and funder of African research based in Nairobi, has chosen to power their open access research platform through F1000. Here's a screenshot just to give you a taste. I also know that there are lots of interesting local projects looking into new avenues for open access publication, like UCT's new continental platform for open access scholarship. The more choice authors have, the more options they have, the better. If anything, I think the open access trend makes it more important than ever that Africa develops a powerful publishing ecosystem of its own on its own terms. I'm going to stop sharing now, but I will make some closing remarks. Right, in conclusion, I firmly believe that co-publishing can create the third space necessary for African researchers and publishers to meaningfully engage both internationally and within their regional contexts. Co-publishing with international players shouldn't be done in lieu of establishing and nurturing an African publishing ecosystem, but it can be a useful tool for building up local capacity while simultaneously ensuring that African researchers don't have to compromise on the reach of their published work. If done fairly and with a true ethos of partnership, co-publishing isn't a force for extraction or extroversion, but should contribute to growing and improving local publishing infrastructures and building the reputations of African publishing brands. Co-publishing is valuable to TNF, not just because of the African research ecosystem it allows us to responsibly engage with, but because the different publishing models we've developed with local partners bring diversity to our global offering. It helps us surmount various challenges we face in the promotion of African research, and it is intended to do the same for the local partners we collaborate with. It's a publishing model that we're proud of, and I hope to see it go from strength to strength in the African context. I think I've talked quite enough. I'm going to pop a link into the chat, which goes to our TNF Africa campaign page. There you can find recordings of other recent webinars, see some of our African portfolio, and most importantly, also sign up for our STAR program, which I'm mentioning because anybody in the Global South who doesn't have institutional access to TNF's journals can gain access by using a STAR voucher. It lets you browse the content freely. Okay, so let me pop that in. And I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Eleanor, for these wonderful talks. I think you cover all the points that concern our research and concerning publishing in Africa and the issue of collaboration. It's a very, very important topic, and I think that there will be many commentary from our colleagues. So first of all, I would like to mention some interesting point that you raised during your talks. One of these points is concerning the issue of collaboration. So how we can build a bridge between North and South by avoiding some tension, avoiding some competition. The way that we are provincialized the research, and it is very important to overcome the situation between North and South by having some collaboration on publishing, having a new partnerships on how the editor they can works together and publish together. So beyond the issues of equitable, fair way and the way that we can have more African editing journal who are published by Taylor and Francis and others, Springer or others editor. I would like to make some comments concerning the way that we are having debate on decolonization, research decolonization. So how can we decolonize the Africans' knowledge productions in the way that we would like to have collaboration between editor. So it will also push us to ask some question that we are reflecting now. The issue of what is an African journal, what is editing in Africa. So in the geopolitics of knowledge, geopolitics of knowledge, which the African journals are underrepresented. So how we can push the situation to enable more African journals to be edited, because it will be impact on some issues concerning ranking, the ranking for the universities, and it's also in the way that we are reflecting on the issues of ranking. Is it fair or not? So which instrument or metrics or index are we using to say that this is the first university of the world, this is the last of the world, because of they have less publication. So in the way that we have collaboration between different editing journal. So how these issues will be worked. And also, I would like to quote it Francis Nyamjo when he said we are moving from publish or perish to publish and perish. We think that this collaboration may participated to perish more African journal or not. So this is the first point that I would like to mention concerning these wonderful talks, and I will let you give some answer, and after that maybe colleagues who are in this room will be raise some relevant points concerning your talks. So thank you again. Thank you for these wonderful talks.
Thank you. You've raised a lot of questions there, Ibrahima, not one point. It's a lot of very good points. I was writing down some notes. Let me touch on it, and then we can open to some other questions. One of the last things you mentioned, publish and perish, which has become a problem. I think that is very central to what I'm discussing, in the sense that it is possible, we know, to publish in, you know, what you feel are reputable journals, but still have your research go nowhere, in the sense that you're not joining a conversation in a global way, you're not accessing the community you want to access, you're not getting the citations you want to access. And tenure committees and institutions still take the publications that you publish in very, very seriously. There's a lot there, the politics of tenure, which needs to change. African institutions need to evaluate how they want to do that better, I think. But until that does happen, there is a need to publish internationally, right? So we want to decolonize, yes, and that means trying to find a local African publisher, and to publish with journals which have African editors and African editorial boards, or at least good African representation, and that publish African authors and don't subscribe in any way to these kind of old colonial barriers. But it also means that you want international reach. And sometimes the best way to do that is to publish with an international publisher as well. So local publisher and an international publisher, best of both worlds. And that's where co-publishing comes in. You know, that's the ideal. That's what we're trying to achieve. What is an African journal? Something else you mentioned. That's a very good question. I suppose a journal that's based in Africa, owned by an African institution or an African society, is clearly African. But there are lots of gray areas here. We live in a very global village. You easily have African journals which are published by international publishers, or international journals, say a European journal, a journal owned by a German society, which is nonetheless edited by African editors. Is that an African journal? I'm not sure. So really, usually it's where the journal is housed. So who owns it, who owns the copyright, that determines whether it's an African journal or not. But you get very good journals which are African in scope, African studies journals, for instance, which are not actually based in Africa. They might be owned by European African studies societies and that sort of thing. They nevertheless engage very positively with the whole decolonization debate. And yes, I don't know, I suppose some people would classify them as African too, because of their African scope. Hopefully that answers a few of the things you raised.
Thank you, Eleanor, for this answer. So if there is colleagues who would like to ask a question to Eleanor, he can raise, or she can raise a hand or his hand, and we can give him or her the floor. So otherwise, there is the question on the chat from D. Smaisi. She asked, what leverage do you have to get your international journal to diversify their editorial committees? So she said also, my experience has been that who is editing makes a big difference over time to if and how Africa is represented in those journals.
That's a very good question, Dee. It varies a lot from journal to journal. First of all, let me say, I absolutely agree with you. I think African representation on boards and in editorial teams is key to improving African representation within that journal. Naturally, because editors and peer reviewers, board members end up inviting peer reviewers and soliciting content, commissioning content, and so on. So it has a big impact. How much control we have as the publisher comes down to the journal itself. There are journals which are publisher owned, either by regional, local publishers or by international publishers. In those cases, the publisher has more control because we are ourselves appointing the editors and we have much more editorial control. However, most journals in our local portfolio, as I said, are society owned or owned by institutions. So they'll be owned by African universities. In those cases, we have less control, but we usually do, we try to cultivate very good relationships with the institutions and societies. They usually accept that their publishers are experienced and have an expert view on these things. So if we engage them in a conversation to say, we feel like it's very important that you increase your African representation on your board or on your editorial team, my experience has been that everybody's very open to that usually. You might occasionally encounter resistance with journals that very heavily prioritize impact factor, because as I was discussing, sometimes publishing a lot of early career researchers, for instance, or diversifying your author pool very quickly can lower citations. It might be really good in other ways, but you might be publishing less high impact authors. And as a result, impact factors can drop, or at least there's a fear that they can drop. So that is resistance we sometimes encounter. But generally, as I said, there's an increased drive for DEI across the board. I think people are really embracing this. Journal editors and the societies and institutions that own journals are increasingly aware that they can't afford not to have African representation, especially if Africa is part of their scope.
So thank you for this answer, and I think D is satisfied concerning questions. There is one issue I would like to raise before colleagues raise their hand to ask a question. The issue of the journal. You have the cover of the journal, and there is sometimes the way that the journal is printing, and the two editor they used to, well, naturally if it's in the way of collaboration, if it's like Codesria and Taylor and Francis, so you should have Codesria and Taylor and Francis in the equally. But we saw some journals published in the collaboration publishing, but you see that the North editor is most represented on the cover than the African editor. This is also an issue that we made concerning collaborations.
Mm-hmm. I remember Divine was holding up book covers in one of the sessions. Yeah, look, that shouldn't happen. I suppose I don't want to comment on individual. That was books publishing, which is not my area. So I'm not quite sure why that would happen for a specific book contract. I suppose there might be cases when you have one very senior publisher and the other publisher is in a much more supporting role. And in cases like that, perhaps the design takes that into account. With journals publishing, my experience has been, I've got a whole bunch of journals on my desk here. The spines either have no publisher on them, which is very common. Not everybody wants publishers on the spine, or they have both, and the covers are the same. No publisher logos, or both, or all three, because often journals are published by, say, two publishers. So you'll have a South African publisher, TNF, and then the society that owns the journal. And you'll have all three of those logos or names on the cover, or none of them. That's mostly down to the society's choice. But I don't have any examples in my portfolio, for instance, where you have an international publisher but not the equal local partner. On the website as well, it should be, because we are moving away from print, right? So online, you should be able to see when a journal is co-published easily and who's co-publishing it.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, do you have questions? Colleagues? I wouldn't like to monopolize the.
There is something in the chat. I'm just busy reading it.
Okay, from Itai.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So she said global North scholars collaborate more together than global North and global South collaboration. Is it possible to have collaboration between global North and global South that is not hierarchical?
I hope so, Itai. I think it's certainly possible. I have seen it done. I've seen a big backlash at African studies conferences, for instance, against this idea that if you have sort of a primary or a lead author who's European, and then you have African co-authors who are doing all of the research on the ground, gathering research because it's African research subject, and then somehow not getting as much credit for that work. That kind of thing is really frowned upon, and I don't think it's easy to get away with anymore. I really hope it isn't. So hierarchy, politics like that, we're working hard to combat. There's no reason at all that scholars from the North and South can't collaborate. Yeah, I mean, you might be right about how, I suppose it's more common for neighboring countries to collaborate naturally, but it definitely does happen that the South and the North collaborate too. And I don't think there are necessarily hierarchical problems there.
Thank you, Eleanor, for this answer. So Minga, can you have the floor?
Yes, thank you so much. The way you went step by step, you actually touch on, I don't know if this question is relevant, because you really gave us an holistic view of what your mandate is and what you do as well. You spoke about, I've written a couple of things here, and some of them have been actually posed by, I think Itai mentioned that, and also Ibrahima mentioned that. You spoke about the issue of exploitation, and you spoke about the issue of inequality, and you spoke about the issue of citations metric, the index, so we know, we are aware of these things. So why should we really bother? Because we know that these exist. And also, I'm glad you position yourself as an African journal, trying to work within the African continent, trying to promote that. And I also saw one of your, one of your, I think, a top collaboration country, one of the images that you gave us on your presentation, where there's South Africa collaboration, country per countries. And I could see China is, actually South Africa is quite big, in terms of collaboration. South Africa holds a big chunk there, and China has a very small chunk in terms of collaboration. And my question is, should we really bother about these issues when we know that, this is what's going to happen? And you mentioned the issue of African studies, which I'm aware of some of the African studies journal in Europe, where the editorial board, you don't find any African there. We had some seminar about that issue of why should you have an African studies journal where you don't even have any African, in that journal. And my question is about, really, should we really bother about that? And why, if yes, and why, if no? Sorry, yeah.
No, it's an interesting, it's a kind of a philosophical question. Look, I think there are always two ways, right? Yes, there are odds stacked against us in many ways, right? We talk about these inequalities, and they're entrenched inequalities in many ways. So you're fighting against a system which has been established over a long time. I suppose there are two things. You can try and combat that system from inside it. As I was showing, Web of Science, all of these things which can be seen as limitations for Global South, it is possible to break through those barriers. It is still possible to publish in African journals which have African publishers and publish African authors routinely and have African editors and all the rest of it. So without endangering any of your ethics in that way, you can still publish in African publication and still get citations and still be heard globally, and still be in a journal with an impact factor. So working within the system through things like co-publishing, you can change the system slowly over time until these things aren't as much of a problem. We are seeing growth, we are seeing improvement. Equally, at the same time, you can also build your own system, right? So the answer to some of these questions is, use what we have, compromise where we can. The other answer is, while you're doing that, because you need to do what's best for your own research too, while you're doing that, make sure you're building up Africa's own publishing ecosystem so that you can create your own rules about these things. Work on your institutions and your tenure committees to make sure that they aren't just valuing research that's published in top northern journals. I do think that influence can be brought to bear, and yeah, I'm optimistic about it. I work within the industry. I'm seeing big changes. So no, I don't think it's pointless.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Minga. Thank you, Eleanor, for this answer. Excuse for my French accent. So, Anne Dawson said, you mentioned open access in your talk. I'm interested in if there are moves in the Taylor and Francis Journal towards open access, as T&F books in the African Studies collection have open access partnerships with knowledge unlatched, etc., meaning author and their institution don't have to pay. Are there such partnerships planned with journals?
Thank you, Anne. Absolutely, yes. We already have a lot of open access partnerships with journals. We publish a lot of pure open access journals. Almost all of our subscription journals are also hybrid, which means you can publish open access in them. But I gather you're also talking about a specific kind of open access. You're talking about not an APC model, or rather a highly subsidized APC model. And yes, we do have journals like that. That is often what I'd call diamond or sponsored open access. That's where a society or an institution is actually covering any costs involved, so that authors are publishing with Creative Commons licenses, they're publishing open access, but they aren't themselves paying for anything, nor are their funders. It's coming from the society or the owner of the journal. So yes, absolutely. And open access is such a growth area. I think there are many plans afoot, and there are so many different open access models where we're trying to keep up.
Okay, thank you. So our colleagues on this research program, Yusra Amdawi, asked a question concerning the issue of hacking of scientific journal. So she said, what do you think of the hacking of scientific journal, and are your journals protected from this practice?
Yes, we try very hard to make sure they are. There are lots of different kinds of hacking and hoaxing and various kinds of predation or hoax publishing, or predatory publishing, as we might say, scam publishing. So yes, there are a lot of underhand things that can happen. One of the ways that publishers invest money is investing in the technology and the systems that protect against these things, and that make author details and all of that sort of thing safe from hacking. So yes, it's something we work very hard at. It is obviously a problem, and it's a constantly evolving problem. So yes, not my area, but absolutely something that we work hard to do.
Thank you, Eleanor, for this answer. So if colleagues have not any other question, we may end the seminar. I think we are at the end of the seminar. Time is still finished. So today we did not have our director. So Minga.
Yes, sorry, yes, I'm back again. So now this is, thank you so much. Now this is now you and me. I'm asking you directly from your own experience with what you've read being produced on the African continent, you know, on a street of, starting from street of Kenya, Senegal, South Africa, you know, everywhere. And I'm talking about publication, everything. What is it that you really picked up from these writings that makes African scholars to not being taken seriously, according to you?
I'm a bit confused by the question, Menga. You're saying, what is it that stops African scholars from being taken seriously?
Yes, yeah, because, you know, because I am sure that, you know, there's publication somewhere or somehow, everywhere in Africa, but these publications are not visible. I'm talking about the issue of visibilities, you know.
You're talking about the things which aren't getting visible, and you're asking why that isn't happening?
Yes, and you come because you've read quite a lot, you know, so what is the issue there? Is it the issue of the stories that are being told, or is it because of the editorial board, or is it because people are not interested with the story that has been published, or both, or all in one? I don't know. I'm just, yeah.
Look, it might sometimes be something to do with the research itself. But for the most part, I think what we're talking about here is infrastructural barriers. So it may be very good research, and it may be well handled, well peer reviewed, but it takes a lot of infrastructure to publish something that has global reach and that reaches a global audience. And that, I mean, that's what you're up against. That's what I've been trying to talk about with all of these barriers to growth and how we can try to address them. And I do think partnership and collaboration is the easiest answer for now, and an answer that works without marginalizing anybody. So yeah, I think the answer from my personal experience is just that it is difficult to get your research published in a publication which has sufficient reach to let you have that international conversation. It's particularly difficult to do it if you also don't want to compromise on having an African publisher, which many of us don't want to do. So yeah, I think that partnership is the best way to solve that problem, because if you publish both with a local publisher and an international publisher, hopefully you're publishing in a venue which is going to allow you to be seen and heard.
Okay. It's okay.
But sorry, Menga, just to be clear, I don't think there's any kind of weakness or innate shortcoming in the research which is coming out of Africa at all. I think these are infrastructural challenges which we're trying to solve.
Yeah, thank you so much for that clarification. Thanks a lot.
So thank you, Minga. Thank you, Eleanor, for being with us this afternoon to talk on these very, very interesting topics. You raised very, very interesting point that will help us in the way that we are building knowledge production on publishing in Africa. So we are very grateful for you, because you give us your time and you stay with us during this hour of seminar. So we did not have our director, Dima Info, is not there. Olushania is not there, and Dominic also is not there to represent the top management of our institute. So maybe colleagues are here, and we also thanks colleagues who are here today, like Minga, Yusram Dawi, Itai Makone, Babakar, Azza Mustafa, and Amina Suleimani. And thanks also to our guests. We thanks to D. Smith, Yunus Omar, Anne Doisson, Abonga, Anli De Jagger, David Cooper. So excuse me for pronouncing your name by using the French accent. So in 2 weeks, we will have the seminar series in French. So maybe next time I will let Itai Makone to chair the meeting in French. So thank you again, Eleanor, and thank you, colleagues. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, Ibrahim, for the seminar.
Okay.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you so much. Bye.